The scale of hunger in Yemen is crushing. 17 million people hunting for food, nearly 7 million slowly starving. And as always, the newest to life are the closest to death.
We're talking about children dying every 6 to 10 minutes in Yemen alone.
Yemen is like Syria without cameras, and by that I mean the suffering of Yemenis is not as well documented, it's not as well YouTubed, Facebook, Twitter.
This is a massive humanitarian tragedy, and the UN has been desperately trying to collect some funds over the last few months, over the last few years, but has not been coming anywhere near the amounts it needs just to respond to the immediate needs of the crisis, let alone to start planning for the future.
Humanitarian effort can try its best to do something about the situation, but already it is very late.
A crisis like this never happens overnight. A daisy chain of disaster in Yemen stretches back to the Arab Spring Uprising of 2011. A time of hope when countries across the region rose up against authoritarian leaders.
The uprising of 2011 really, in a way, was the spark that caused what was probably the inevitable collapse of Yemen. The frustrations, the fault lines, regional and political, throughout the country had been building up. They were boiling beneath the surface, and they would have exploded at some point.
Politics were bigger than our dreams. So we dreamt for a better future, and all of those rosy ideas about why people go on protest. All of those dreams and hopes were really smashed. It was quicker than we imagined.
So when the Arab Spring started to spread throughout the Middle East in early 2011, it reached Yemen pretty quickly.
It was against the rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who ruled Yemen more than 3 decades. And of course, that was not easy for him to swallow.
Saleh's troops opened fire on protesters, but that only triggered mass defections. A deal brokered by Saudi Arabia and other powers in the region forced him from office, but not from the country.
Ali Abdullah Saleh let go of power, but never let go of politics. He was preparing for a civil war.
President Saleh is a fascinating character, a very unsavory character, but he fundamentally stayed alive, and by alive I mean politically alive, but physically alive, from 1978 by constantly manipulating alliances within Yemen, through his tribal networks, within the armed forces, within the security forces, within business networks, but also externally.
Especially during the last, I would say the last decade of his rule, he was smart in milking international aid in the name of fighting terrorism. So most of the weapons that he has today, he was given by the US or the UK.
In 2015, Saleh and his allies joined with a rebellion in the north of the country known as the Houthis.
We will not stop until the last beat of our hearts, until the last drop of our blood. Women, men, and children will fight.
Saudi Arabia, pointing to Houthi ties to its arch-rival Iran, intervened to prop up the government.
These operations to prevent Yemen from falling at the hands of the Houthis.
Saudi airstrikes and a naval blockade were condemned by human rights groups. For the poorest country in the Arab world, the collapse of the food supply was almost immediate.
One of the Red Cross officials were saying that Yemen in 5 months looks like what Syria looked like in 5 years.
But the Obama White House backed the Saudi intervention for strategic reasons.
President Obama and his administration made it pretty clear that they did not think that the Saudi intervention in Yemen was likely to succeed. They did not think, in simple terms, that it was a very good idea, but they made the cold, pragmatic calculus that it was better to keep the Saudis close.
It's a calculation the Donald Trump administration is making as well. The U.S. is finalizing tens of billions of dollars of arms sales to Saudi Arabia, ahead of Trump's trip there next week, the first foreign visit of his presidency.
Saudi Arabia, it has the largest, oil revenue in the world. So trying to think in Donald Trump's mind, he will see this as a business, affair.
Canada sees business here as well. Canada's largest arms deal ever is with Saudi Arabia. Signed by the Harper government, it's been controversial, but Trudeau is pushing ahead.
It is a fairly important principle that a change of government in Ottawa doesn't lead to the cancellation of contracts previously signed.
Canada has agreed with Saudi Arabia to the sale of about $15 billion in light armored vehicles. So these light armored vehicles have obviously not been delivered yet to Saudi Arabia. So have they been used in Yemen? Obviously not. Could they be used in the future? That's possible. Let's be frank, when you sell weapons to a country, you are ready for the possibility that that country may use these weapons in war, because that's what weapons do.
Of course, if Canada did not sell it to the Saudis, the French will do, the Brits will do, the Americans will do. I assume that the more priority for such governments is really just show me the money.
This is Yemen's history, a century of local conflicts fueled by foreign powers and foreign weapons.
British jets roar into the attack across the barren rocks and peaks of southern Arabia. Jets against medieval tribesmen. In an age of disappearing empires, the place where a colonial power is determined to stick.
The West traditionally pursues its strategic goal of the day. Yemen's people pay the price. But with millions now on the brink, that may not be good enough.
Right now in Yemen, and this is the tragedy of the humanitarian situation, there is no military solution in Yemen, even if the U.S. increases its support for Saudi Arabia. Even if Saudi Arabia, alongside with its allies, even if they ramp up their support, they will not win this war. The scary thing, if the U.S. decides to support Saudi ramping up its intervention in Yemen, is that this will pour oil on the fire.
Right now, what Yemen urgently needs is aid and a diplomatic push to end the war. For many, it is already very late.